this morning, we have the wonderful privilege of hearing and talking with somebody who is on and has been on the front lines of advancing the case of religious freedom and defending the persecuted from all over our world. Someone who's been in so many countries and has worked with Baptist churches and other churches, Jewish synagogues all over to try to help speak into issues of religious persecution. And I'm excited, Randel Everett, that you're here, and Sheila, your wonderful wife. Dr. Randel Everett is a statesman and a hero in Baptist life. He is formerly the executive director of the Baptist General Convention of Texas, an organization that pulls together over 5,000 Baptist churches throughout our state and does amazing ministry. And we're a big part of that. Our church is about the 30th giver of the 5,000 churches. We're in the top 30 churches that helped the BGCT to move forward. And Dr. Everett was the person who ran that whole organization a number of years ago. He was the pastor before that at several amazing churches. First Baptist Midland, for all of you West Texas folk, he was the pastor at First Baptist Midland. Before that, he was the pastor at First Baptist beautiful Pensacola, Florida. And I don't know why you ever moved from there. He left Pensacola, Florida to go and be the pastor at the famous Columbia Baptist Church in Washington, D.C., in Virginia. And while he was there, made a difference in the United States Congress, the United States Senate, presidents and congressmen and leaders of state would go, brother, and listen to you preach, and you were able to make friends and do such great work at a huge global level when you were a pastor there at Columbia. And on a couple of occasions, he was the chaplain for the morning for the United States Senate. He left all of those, though, to go and to start with a congressman named Congressman Frank Wolf to start an organization called 21 Wilberforce. And the entire reason that 21 Wilberforce exists is to help situations like you just heard. Wherever there are people who are being persecuted for their faith from either a governmental kind of oppression or a kind of oppression that rises up in a kind of a mob mentality, either way, wherever people are persecuted for their faith, 21 Wilberforce seeks to go in and to help and to speak. And they have had great success. But more than all of that, Randel is my buddy, and he is my friend, and he has loved me, and he has loved First Baptist Marble Falls for a long time. He cares about you and what we're trying to do missionally. And we are very grateful to have him with us this morning as he and I talk about what God is doing in the entire world in situations just like this. I'm so grateful that you're here. He mentored my mentor, a guy named Bruce Webb that you've heard me talk about, the pastor at First Baptist Church of the Woodlands. Dr. Randel Everett was his mentor when he served on staff at University Baptist Church when he pastored right there next to Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth. And so will y'all please give a First Baptist Marble Falls welcome to Dr. Randel Everett and his wife, Sheila. Thank you, Sheila. Thank you, brother, for being here with us. Randel, I'm so happy that everyone here gets to meet you and love you the way that I do. Thank you, brother.
It's such a privilege. We're excited about being here. Sheila and I have looked forward to this for a long time. Ross is one of my favorite pastors anywhere. And I just picked up on his friendliness and Megan, and it's just been really neat to see how the whole church is like that. We walked in this morning, and I'm going to be, I don't know how many things I've been exposed to because I got hugged so many times. And so, anyway, and Tess, we got to know Tess. Tess came, and she's been to some of our board meetings. She's like a junior fellow with 21 Wilberforce. As soon as you get out of college and get your law degree and all that, you can be president, of Wilberforce. But excited to be here. The special relationship with Ross, I think I met him maybe at a state convention or something, and he came up to me and he said, I'm your grandson. And I said, could we talk about this somewhere else? You know, I didn't. Yeah, I didn't. And he told me about Bruce being his mentor, and I had the privilege of building into some of Bruce's life. But thank you so much for the privilege of being here today,
Randel. Well, we're all excited about this. We hear about issues of persecution, things like the Mayflower Church. Y'all will hear more about that in a moment. And if you've ever wondered, well, what can we do? When you hear, if you've read Fox's Book of the Martyrs, or you hear about these things and you're thinking, what do we do as a church to speak into this? And that's what we're here today to talk about. Can you help us understand just the basic idea of what 21 Wilberforce is?
Surely, I think it's a twofold purpose. One, how do we defend the persecuted? And secondly, how do we promote religious freedom? We want to defend people who are persecuted from all faith backgrounds, and so for us to have the First Amendment in the United States, the story we just heard from that incredible couple who are there representing Jesus in this hard country. I told Sheila, between the services, we've done nothing. I mean, what they're doing is just absolutely amazing. And so, how can we stand with people like that, and how can we work with them and make a difference? And so, that's basically what happened.
Yeah.
I'd been exposed. We were in the D.C. area, but all really since probably when God called me to preach. I knew there's a nexus between politics and faith, and so even when I was in Arkansas, I was chaplain of the House of Representatives in Arkansas for 4 years, and while I was pastor at First Baptist Church in Benton, Arkansas, just how can we bring our faith in the public sphere in such a way that we can keep the First Amendment was we have that because of John Leland in Virginia Baptist. He was a pastor in Culpeper. While he was there, he baptized probably 200 people. So he's very evangelistic. He's very anti-slavery, which probably is why he was only there 15 years in Virginia. Mm-hmm. But he mandated to James Madison that if he did not get explicitly, especially written into the Constitution, religious freedom, that the Virginia Baptists would vote for Leland for the Constitutional Convention rather than Madison. So it's there. And we could very easily today be in the same situation that this couple, the country where they're serving, that they're in today. What we have in our country is brand new.
In the world?
Yeah. And still one of the greatest places where this is existing. So we want to fight for that.
And we as Baptists really have a deep legacy in this of all the Christian denominations. John Leland was a Baptist, and religious freedom was not in the Constitution originally, right? The Bill of Rights that came about just a little bit later, the very first one that said that no government shall establish a religion or prohibit the free exercise thereof, gives people the freedom to worship according to the dictates of their own conscience and their own mind, rather than being told by some group, this is what you have to believe, which opens the door of freedom for people to give their lives to Jesus Christ, for evangelism and churches to be planted and all of that to go forward. So, wherever that's not happening, then we're seeing just atrocious things happen to people who are trying to follow the Lord according to what they believe is right. And it's so difficult for them who don't have what we have.
And so the next time Ross invites me here, let's talk about religious freedom. Why is that important? The church doesn't need the state to prop it up. I mean, the gospel stands on its own. I'm quoting a friend from a generation ago who said, when you mix church and state, it's like mixing ice cream with manure. It's not going to hurt the manure. So anyway, we'll have a conversation about religious freedom. And
that's right.
Why it's so important to us.
And that's our heritage. Y'all are a part of that, whether you know it or not. That particular fight is yours and mine. Yeah. So in 21 Wilberforce speaks into countries all over our world where a lack of that is creating persecution. Yeah. And so I know that you have several points of biblically what that means for us. Randel, help us to understand some of these biblical points so that we as a Baptist church can look to the Word of God and see what the mandate is.
The whole idea of Wilberforce came out of a conversation with Congressman Frank Wolf. The International Religious Freedom Bill is named for him. It's the Frank Wolf bill. And so one day when I was pastor in Midland, and I love being a pastor. It's the best job in the world. I'm just so envious of you and Megan being here, this loving congregation. And I was pastor at First Baptist Midland, and I was at this really nice restaurant, and I got a telephone call, and the guy said, this is Frank Wolf. And I said, like, Congressman Frank Wolf? And he says, yes. He said, you have time to talk? And so I said, well, certainly. So I pulled out of the line at Chick-fil-A, and I was sitting over in the parking lot there and had a long conversation with him. But the very first thing Congressman Wolf said to me was, what's it going to take to wake up the church in America?
Yeah.
He had been a congressman for 30-something years. He's traveled himself to all these places of concern, not as a member of Congress, but under the radar, so that he could see. He spent the night in refugee camps, and he doesn't understand why the church in America is not engaged in this. He said, what is it going to take to wake up the church in America? And so that was one of the things that engaged my wife and me in the realization that something like 21 Wilberforce needed to exist. And by God's grace, he ended up, after we started Wilberforce, to not run for re-election. He joined our staff for several years, and we'll see him, he and his wife, in a couple of weeks in D.C., still very much a part of our work. Well, so why be involved in, I was standing with this man who was a real, he would call himself a pillar in the church. It's a real prominent church in Dallas, and he said, there's always going to be persecution. So why worry about persecution? And I say a pillar in the church is someone that just stands there and won't move. And so he was one of those guys. He was a real pillar. I was furious. I said, well, you got a good point. There's sick people. There are always going to be sick people. Why have doctors? They're criminals. They're always going to be criminals. So why have law enforcement? Of course we're going to fight for religious freedom. But biblically, why biblically should we support those who are facing religious persecution? And the first reason, I want to share 5 reasons, and I'll try to be quick. But I'm a preacher. Just keep that in mind, But the first one is, don't we want to be where Jesus is working?
Yeah.
I mean, that's why we're in this, right? We want to be in a church where Jesus is working in that church. We want to be in an area where Jesus is working. Well, how do we know where Jesus is working? He told us. He had just been tempted in the wilderness. He started his ministry up in Galilee. He came to Nazareth, to the synagogue that had trained him and raised him as a child, as a young lad, as a young man. And he was offered the scroll of Isaiah, and he opened the scroll of Isaiah to a text that he claimed for himself. And here's what he said: the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord's anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He sent me to bring release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, set free those who are oppressed, and to announce the favorable year of the Lord.
Yeah.
Right up front, he told us, you want to be where I'm working? This is where I'm working.
Yes.
I'm working with the poor. I'm working with the oppressed. He's not working with the complacent. You're not going to find him there. You're not going to find him where people are just satisfied. It's when churches get involved in these places and these situations of great need that only God can supply. And so Luke 4:18 was a scripture that captured our hearts. Is a scripture I preached on the Sunday I announced the First Baptist Midland that we were going to be doing this thing. There's a Wilberforce room at Dallas Baptist University, and in the back of the room has got that text up on the wall.
Yeah.
That was a text that I had used for starting Wilberforce. It's always in our mind. And by God's grace, we have seen with the story we just heard, the interview we just heard, we have seen God doing some amazing things in our world. I wish I had time to reminisce. I'll share just maybe a couple of things. One, the situation in Afghanistan was just horrendous. When we exited, and all the people there that were left, whose lives were in jeopardy. A lot of these people who were friends of the U.S. or who were Christians or others that were persecuted, they wanted to get to America or Canada. Well, those slots got filled pretty quickly. So we wondered, how can we help them? Well, we have a lawyer in our staff who's in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And so he found out that there's a pathway for citizenship in Brazil. And if we could just get these people to Brazil, then they could be saved. And so working through their government, well, the government came back and said, well, you've got to prove that you can help them for a year. So you can give them food and housing, clothing, all those things for a year. Well, we worked with the Brazilian Baptist Convention. And by the way, the Baptist mission work in Brazil was started from Texas. The Bagbies in Texas went there. And so they love the Bagbies. There's a street in Waco where we live, this thing, Bagby Avenue. These are just the heroes. So he began to work through there. But then where are we going to put these people if we get them to come to Brazil? A wealthy man, Gilmer, owned 100 acres. It was a resort, just absolutely beautiful resort. If you've been to Brazil, you know how beautiful the countryside is. A beautiful resort. And so God laid it on his heart. He put this burden on his heart for Afghans. And so he said, well, you can use my resort for 5 years for free. Yeah. We've been there. Sheila and I've been there. We were there with Gilmer, and Gilmer was hearing these stories of these Afghans, and just tears running down his cheek. He's been involved in all kinds of business enterprises. He's had such an incredible, successful life. He's never had a privilege like where he is now, because he's right in the middle of where Jesus is working. By God's grace, we've gotten over 700 people out of Brazil, out of Afghanistan into Brazil. And it's still growing. This morning, we were sitting there before the first service. We got a video from Sao Paulo at the church where we had spoken, where they had welcomed one of these families. The families come in, they stay there for a few months, and then churches around Brazil adopt them, bring them into the churches, and furnish them with apartments and school for the children, and help them learn the language and help them learn jobs. They're there for life, these families with their life. Mm-hmm. A majority of them have actually been Muslims, and they didn't come and say, well, you got to be a Jesus follower before we can help you. Mm-hmm. They love them because they're people, created in the image and likeness of God. But these people who are coming, many of them are coming to Christ. Some of them have dreams of Jesus, but they say, we've never seen love like this. Why are these people doing this for us? So I had the privilege of preaching at First Baptist Church in Pena. It's in Sao Paulo. We've got a picture of, well, actually, we don't have a picture of that church, but Sheila and I came there that Sunday morning, and I guess that there were 1,500 people in attendance there. This is the church that we got a video from this morning. They're just 2 hours ahead of us. And so this is the service happening right now. But when we were there earlier this year, we felt the Holy Spirit at work in that church before the service ever started. It was unbelievable. And we met the pastor. The pastor, so much like Ross, he and his wife are just phenomenal. I told him about First Baptist Marble Falls and about Ross. I told him about the church. I said, y'all ought to create a partnership. Let Ross go and preach there some Sunday, and let Victor come and preach here some Sunday. Get to know each other. They need to relocate just like you guys did. But that service, we walked in, and there were about 1,500 people at the service. The lawyers with me said, he thought there were 2,000 people. I said, only a lawyer can outlie a preacher. But anyway, they had an orchestra and choir of about 100 people. Many of the people in the orchestra were actually in the National Symphony. It was phenomenal. Every person in the church sang every word of every song. Little kids were trying to clap, and it was just. And then they had this Muslim family, a husband and his wife and 4 kids, stand up on the platform, surrounded by all these Christians, giving them a standing ovation. And this husband just put his hand over his heart and just kept going, thank you. Thank you. One of the kids they gave him a bicycle and this stuff. Mm-hmm. So it's unbelievable to see what God is doing. I do have one of the other churches I preached. We've got just a short video of them. This is the villa where we were meeting with these 75. But here's the church. This is a Sunday night, storming. This is one of 4 services, all of them full, in this church near Rio. And hear the music. God is really working in that church, and so many of those churches like that. And during the both services that I preached that Sunday night, adults came to know Christ, and they made their profession of faith public. And when they came forward and they were introduced into the church, people were holding up banners like at a golf tournament, or like, saying, "Welcome to the family," and we love you, you love Jesus. It's amazing. And
Yes.
I'm this stoic Texas Baptist pastor. Y'all are raising your hands and clapping, and I've got my hands in my pocket. And sometimes God is so much at work. I'll get one hand up. Oh, these folks they were going nuts. They were just going crazy, worshiping Jesus. And so I want to be. Don't y'all want to be? That's why you're helping this family. Mm-hmm. We want to be where Jesus is working. So the number one reason that 21 Wilberforce exists is Luke 4:18-19. He told us where he's going to be working, and we could tell you stories from every continent. Two of the fastest growing churches in the world are in Iran and in China. It's amazing to see what God's doing. I'm sorry, but the interpreter for these Afghans was this beautiful Iranian woman. She's beautiful. Her spirit made her so beautiful. And she's translating. And we said, first of all, how did you learn their language? And it was very similar to Farsi. So that's how she knew it. And I said, well, you were in Iran. Iran's a closed country. How did you come to know Jesus? And she said, through satellite television. And I said, oh, satellite television. I said, have you ever heard of Hermos Sharat? And she said, he was my pastor. And I said, he's a friend. I spent the night in their home. It's Iran Alive. And they broadcast Christian television 24/7. And 6 million people in Iran say that's their favorite network of all the networks. Wow. 20 million watch their programs every day. They took this book that I wrote, and they're training leaders so that they translate it into Farsi. They said when the regime change happens, and they believe it's going to happen, when it happens, we need to have leaders that are trained and ready to go. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to do with them in partnership. But here we were in a pastor's office in Sao Paulo, listening to a Iranian woman who came to know Jesus through a partnership ministry, witnessing to Afghans who had been rescued by the grace of God.
Yes.
Why would we not want to be where Jesus is working?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the first reason why we want to do this.
Yeah, and these ladies and girls from Afghanistan, when the Taliban came in, they would have taken away all their freedom. These little girls couldn't have gotten an education. Women can't work. And so now they come to Brazil and they experience real freedom, equality. And they never would have had that chance. So what a thing. That's where the Lord is.
And almost every family that we interviewed had some member of their family murdered. This family that was there in that service, her dad had been killed by the Taliban. They were astounded that we thought that the Taliban wouldn't act like the Taliban.
Yeah. When we talk about, well, where is the Lord? It's not a mystery. We don't have to say, oh, goodness, we don't know. It's real mysterious. No. Luke 4, he says, if you want to know where I am, I'm right here. Just look here. And that's what you've identified. Thank you. That's a great first idea. What's the second one?
A second one, the Bible commands it. We talk about the great commandment, love God with all our heart, soul, and mind, and love our neighbors ourselves. Sure, that's the great commandment. And we talk about the Great Commission, make disciples. And those of us who've been exposed to Greek in school, will say these are imperative commands. And so make disciples are both, we call it the great commands. Well, in Hebrews 13:3, it says, remember those who are in prison as though you're in prison with them, and those who are ill-treated because you're also part of the body. That word remember there is an imperative command, just like make disciples is in Matthew 28. Mm-hmm. So I believe if the Bible commands us to make disciples, it also commands us to remember those who are in prison. I believe churches that are not standing with the persecuted are disobeying God's word. I think we have a biblical command to stand with the persecuted.
Gosh, that's huge, because often we only talk about the Great Commandment, the Great Commission, Great Commandment, Great Commission. But we often, we deeply leave this out. We don't say, this is a huge command as well, to defend the persecuted, but it is a biblical command for us. Yeah, I love that.
Well, a third reason, and I got this out of a conversation with Ross. Ross is one of our trustees. He's on our board, and we're so grateful for that. And Chris Etheridge has been really involved in our ministry as well. And thank you guys for being a partner with us. But we were talking about mission strategy. And don't you love Romans 10? How often do we go to Romans 10? In Romans 10, 9 and 10, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, if you believe in your heart God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. For the heart man believes, resulting in righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made, resulting in salvation. When I was a young boy, I confessed with my mouth Jesus is Lord, and I believed in my heart that God raised him from the dead, and God saved me. After all the opportunities I've had for education and experience, there's nothing I could have added to that experience as a little boy. And verse 13 says, call on the name of the Lord and you'll be saved. Don't you love that? I mean, these are just great. What about verse 14? Verse 14 says, how will they call on him whom they've not believed? How will they believe in him whom they've not heard? And how will they hear without a preacher? One of the reasons we exist is we want every person in the world to have the freedom to hear that Jesus is Lord. And so we're going to fight for that. It's so important to make sure you get these unjust laws off the books and these corrupt leaders out of office so that we could plant churches in the area and they could close every door in that area overnight. Just with bad legislation. So we work with the UN, we work with European parliaments, we work with our Congress, our State Department, whoever is our administration, to really fight. One example of this happened in Zali, Lebanon. Sheila and I love Lebanon. Our heart is in Lebanon in so many ways. Well, while we were there, we met this guy that has become a friend, and he's got a horrible name. His name is Jihad. So anyway, to be named Jihad in the middle of the Middle East, I think I would change it to Bubba or something. But so there's probably a Bubba in the church. There's a Bubba in every Baptist church. I could run that line for a while, but Jihad is a layman. He's a builder. And so God told Jihad, I want you to go start a church in Zali. And Jihad basically was saying, hey, you got the wrong number. I'm a businessman. I'm not a preacher. And God said, I want you to start a church in Zali. And he said, Lord, do you know where Zali is? I mean, Zali's on the Syrian line. It's seriously a dangerous place. If I'm going to start a church, maybe Beirut or someplace, but why would I go to Zali? And God basically told Jihad, this is not this is not a conversation or debate. Yeah, go do it. And so we're not negotiating. And so finally, to prove God wrong, Jihad went to Zali, and he started a Bible study. And they had a Bible study in prayer group for a while, and they it didn't happen. I mean, it didn't grow or anything. After a few months, he thought, "See there, God, it's not going to work. It's not a good plan." Well, then a few more started coming. A few people came to know Christ. And then they grew, and so they needed a place to worship. Well, we've been there. They've got this beautiful building now that they built themselves with their own hands. It's got all kinds of accommodations there. God just blessed and blessed and blessed, and this church grew. And so he was just loving it. He was excited that he was a part of this church. And then God said, now I want you to reach these Syrian children around here. 1 million Syrians had flooded the little territory of Lebanon, with only about a 4 million population. And Jihad was emphatic. He said, no, I hate Syrians. He had been a soldier. He fought against Syrians. They were the enemies. And he resented all these Syrian kids that were there from Syria flooding their land. And so he said, I am not going to start a ministry to these children. And God said, it's not a negotiation. Yeah. Start it. They started they were 12-year-old kids who had never been to school in their life. A lot of these kids had lost at least one parent, or maybe both parents. They started out by starting some schools, some basic schools. And then they would share Jesus with these kids, and some of the kids were becoming Christians. And God just absolutely exploded. And now Wilberforce is partnered with them, and they've got several different schools that are there. Many of these have come to know Christ. I've got a video of one of those schools. This is chapel. This was in the basement of this church, if we could find that. I've got all this stuff out of order. Here it is. These are kids in the school, one of the schools.
Isn't
that great?
Syrian children.
Yeah, these are refugee kids. They come to school with nice backpacks, and they're picked up in vehicles and brought here, and they're singing. And these kids sang in English while we were there. Jesus loves me, and we were going. He does.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so do we.
So do we.
Yeah. So religious freedom gives people an opportunity to hear the gospel of Christ and respond to the gospel of Christ. Jihad told us is that you folks live in the security zone and are full of fear. We live in the conflict zone and we see miracles every day.
Yeah.
Again, let's be where Jesus is working.
That's amazing. And I believe this with my whole heart, that if we can have big inroads into countries that are closed and countries that have no religious freedom at all, if we can break through some of that, then what is going to break through is every Christian mission organization in the whole world. Catholics and Methodists and Baptists and non-denominationalists. Every single Christian group will benefit to be able to go to all of these countries if they can have freedom. And what we're going to see is churches that are planted. We're going to see hospitals that are started. We're going to see schools that are started. We're going to see orphanages. We're going to see a radical movement of Jesus Christ, the way that you and I have got to live and experience here. We will see that in other places, and the mission movement will create it. But what we have to do is keep working toward religious freedom and helping the persecuted in these places. And that's your point number 3, isn't it?
Yeah. And I'll just mention the fourth one. The fourth one is it just brings comfort to those who are persecuted. John Saw is a preacher in China. He was an interpreter for me when we were doing a leadership training there. We had 1,800 house church pastors and lawyers and all of this training. John was a translator. Well, he's been sentenced to 7 years in prison, and with the most humble, godly man you'd ever meet. And so one of the fears that these people who are arrested have is that they'll be forgotten, that no one will ever know that they're still alive. And so we need to pray for them. Dr. Sampson was president of one of the Baptist conventions in Myanmar. I still call it Burma. He was Elijah Brown, who spoke here just a few months ago, the General Secretary of the Baptist World Alliance. On Easter Sunday morning, Elijah and I were on a video call with Dr. Sampson's wife and his daughter. He's been sentenced to 6 years in prison. We have the technology today, and this partnership with the Baptist World Alliance, we're in 132 countries. Every Baptist church in the world should have been praying for Dr. Sampson by name on the Sunday after he was arrested. Yeah. We can do that. Why don't we do that? Mm-hmm. And so it brings comfort. Yeah, they deserve it.
They deserve it.
When Paul wrote Philippians in the 4th chapter, he's just telling the church in Philippi, thank you. You've done it before, you're doing it again. Thank you for standing with me during this hard time.
Yes.
And the 5th reason is just simple. We can make a difference. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the Mayflower Church. You guys were actually part of something that's historic. Mm-hmm. This Mayflower Church, it was an underground church in China, and they were being persecuted. They said we need to find a place where we can live, where we can teach our own children. And so they left China and they went to Jeju Island in Korea, where Chinese could go without a visa. So they just went there like they were visiting, but they stayed there. They stayed there for a few years. This whole church, 84 people in this church. And then all of a sudden, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, which is brutal, times are as bad today. There's never been a time since the Cultural Revolution what's happening in China today. So they put pressure on Korea. So they had to leave Korea and they went to Taiwan. Thailand. Mm-hmm. So in Thailand, they were there, and then all of a sudden, they were all arrested one day, all 64 of them, men, women, children. The women and children were put in one prison. The men were put in another prison. I got a call that morning about 6 or 7 in the morning from Frank Wolf. He said, you got to call Cornyn and tell Cornyn to tell Blinken to get them a humanitarian visa today, or they're going to be sent back to China. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, sure. Cornyn and I have breakfast together all the time. We're on a bowling team together. Well, how do you get word to Cornyn and how do you get word to Blinken? And so, but we had a network. We had a network of people who are interested in these issues, and First Baptist Marble Falls is in that network. And so we sent this letter out to Ross and to others, and we said, sign this today. We've got the, and not only did we send them to our leaders, we also sent them to members of parliament in the UK. We called them, we had others, and we said, they need this to happen today.
It's something that happened here during that. So I called Terry Wilson. I thought he might be here this morning. Our state representative in this area, Terry Wilson, who called his friend, Congressman Carter, who represents us. And Congressman Carter was also contacting Anthony Blinken in the State Department. All of these people doing that. Yeah.
Well, we got a number of signatures in a day. We sent those out, and it was my understanding that actually Congressman McCall took that to Blinken and said we need this emergency visa to take place. Well, again, nothing like that had ever happened, to give a humanitarian visa to this many people and to bring them here. Well, that was on Thursday before Holy Week. On Good Friday of Holy Week, Randy Dale, he's out here at our booth. He's on our staff. He's a lawyer. God can use anybody. And so anyway, Randy and his wife Melinda, we were there on Good Friday watching a Good Friday miracle when these 64 people got off the airplane in DFW, and churches in East Texas adopted them, welcomed them there. That was just this year. In January, they're going to be relocating in Midland. I'm preaching back in Midland next week, and a family there has given them 250 acres. There's some structures that are already there. There's a builder. The church is going to build churches. It's like a $5.5 million gift. Instead of being in prison in China, they're raising their children in freedom because Christians took advocacy seriously, and we let our voice be heard. It's an absolute miracle. I've got it's just, you can make it. I'll show you this picture. We stayed in, this is with me with a little baby from the Mayflower Church. All of them got to come to Texas except for one family. And the lady was pregnant and due to give birth anytime. And so they wouldn't let her on a plane. And they didn't even offer to have a nurse fly with them, but they didn't. So we were scared to death that they were left by themselves in Thailand and that they would never get freed. Well, by God's grace, they got free too. And so when they got to East Texas, I drove over there one day and we were welcoming them to Texas, and just so glad that they're there. And they brought, this is baby Monica. They named her after Augustine's mother, Monica. They brought baby Monica out and handed her to me. And it was so emotional. I left pretty quickly, and I got to my truck and just bawled. Baby Monica should never know the kind of persecution and lack of religious freedom that she would have had if Christians hadn't stood up for her. And so, why do we do 21 Wilberforce? Baby Monica. Yeah, it's why we do it. It's such a privilege to partner with First Baptist Marble Falls and doing that.
Randel, this has been absolutely outstanding. Thank you so much